All right, here he is. He's been a stalwart of ABT over the years. He's lived everywhere from New South Wales to Queensland, caught everything from Barra to Blue Marlin. Jace Wilhelm, good to have you on Lockdown Live, mate. Good to track you down. You're living in Tweed Heads now, aren't you?
Yeah, g'day, Steve. Look, firstly, thanks for the opportunity. Obviously, it's a great thing to catch up and discuss some pretty historic times for, I guess, my career and also, the early ABT days, particularly for Barra. So, yeah, thanks for having me on. And, yeah, obviously living in Tweed Heads now.
Yeah, and look, mate, I suppose from an ABT point of view, your claim to fame is you won the first ever ABT Barra event that we had on Lake Awunga back in 2005, I think the year was. And then after you did that, you were gracious enough to take out my poor old mate Gary Boyd from America, who'd struggled to catch a fish and whacked a few really nice barra with you, mate. So not only were you a champion angler, you're a champion bloke back then, mate. It was a great experience that time, wasn't it? ABT Barra coming to life.
Absolutely, Steve. And, I actually, if we want to go back that far and probably delve back a bit further, AFC was something that I heard about through Steve Starling. And I lived next door to him in Gerringong. And basically, one day I come home from work and there's this boat parked out the front of Starlow's house. And it was, I can't remember the exact details, but it was sponsored by NetSpace and had, it had the Min coders, it had the sound. Look, it was way ahead of its time. I'd never seen anything like it, not in Australia. And I remember thinking, what's the go with this? So I spoke to Steve and he explained what the AFC was. And at that time, it just lit a whole heap of fuses, and I was just like, wow, I'd love to be part of that one day. And I guess if you fast track, a year later, I moved to Gladstone and whispers started coming around and about ABT Barra, actually coming to the fore and actually really happening. So for me, it was a prime opportunity to chase a dream that I'd made only, a year or so earlier. But, history proves that, if you have a dream like that and you put yourself in the right position, that things can happen. And I guess that's really how it happened for me.
So what was you doing in Gladstone working? Tell us what your job was. You weren't far away from Barra and the Salt, were you, either, with what you did?
That's right. Look, obviously I've been a fisherman my whole life, but I spent some time in the Navy. So I spent a lot of time at sea and I was working on charter boats and that sort of thing back in Wollongong on the south coast of New South Wales. And I was based in Sydney for 4 years on HMAS Sydney. So I spent, 3.5 years overseas, on deployments and stuff. I got out of the Navy and then decided to take my career to the water side, to the wharves. So, through a lot of hard effort and being in the right place at the right time, I got a job on the wharf. And then in Gladstone, a company called Camalco built this, U-Butte brand new refinery. And through some research, I thought, this place looks all right. It's got Barra up there, this Awunga Dam, which was quite new. And back then there was very little even spoken about it unless you went looking for it. So I started researching, went, wow, look, this could be a really good opportunity for myself and also my wife. And we didn't have kids at the time. So essentially we just packed up and Rio Tinto moved us to Gladstone. And then, within a week, I had myself a tinny and was on the dam looking for these Barra that were supposedly in these waters, but simply wasn't like that. It wasn't that easy to find them, that's for sure.
That's right. Now, look, AFC Barra, like you won the first ABT Barra event, but it took a few years for it to get you onto the AFC Barra in front of the scenes. But I'll tell a story now that you used to help us out behind the scenes as well. And when the guys were out there trying to catch a Barra, and I needed to call someone to say, I need a Barra for Starlo to do a piece to camera with. Can you come and catch us a Barra? Because these guys on the show are struggling a bit. You'd rock up and at about 5 casts, you caught about 1.10 m Barra for us. And we got Starlo across and did a piece, mate. So I don't think anyone really knows that story, but you were the man we called when we needed to get something actually caught. So it was good to see you help us behind the scenes, but then eventually qualify and get on the show.
Yeah, look, and I guess it was highly motivating for me to have the caliber of you guys, wanting some help, and to see people like Steve and yourself, your brother, and all the quality anglers around, obviously being in my backyard, if there was an opportunity for me to help, it was an opportunity for me to learn and to see how everything works. So, yeah, it was those early days was fun, and it was certainly good to meet a lot of those anglers. A lot of those guys I would have never met before. So I guess for me, it really sustained the energy that I wanted and needed to push forward to try and get a crack at AFC, which, like I said, was a dream.
Yep. Well, it ultimately happened, but we also met you a little bit before that as well when we were at Cania Dam. I think you came out and visited Starlo out there while we were filming some old Cania bass episodes and saw the whole thing in action. It was pretty impressive to see helicopters flying only 10 feet above the water.
Oh, look, it was eye-opening, mate. I'll be honest with you straight up. I was completely starstruck, you know. Like, I got a phone call from Starlo and he said, look, come for a drive up Cania. We're filming an AFC bass series. All the guys are here. You can meet Steve Morgan and ask him some questions about AFC. And I think I was out the door before I put the phone down. So I shot up there with my sister and, yeah, absolutely just saw this amazing production. And it was just phenomenal. There was 20-plus cameras and you name it. As you know, there was helicopters. There was, you know, camera boats. There was tournament boats. There was anglers. There was everything. And it was just, for me, gosh, I don't think you could have lit or poured more fire or petrol on a fire because I just went, I got to have a piece of this. You know, like it really, my eyes were open, and I'm happy to share that. I was totally starstruck.
Well, let's move forward to when you qualified for AFC and you got on. I remember you fished with Carl Jochimson one year, and one of the enduring bits of AFC footage that I love is that jerkbait bite from Carl on a wonga. I bet you remember that as well too. Just run us through that scenario and how the little fella nearly got pulled out of the boat.
Look, it was hilarious because obviously Jocko back then was, you know, a little skinny young fella, and yeah, exactly, you know, and the beauty of that was, and we didn't get to see all of it, but there was obviously a fair bit of work that went in behind the scenes of getting that retrieve right, because there was a lot of pause in that retrieve and something that Jocko wasn't used to doing. So adding some sticky weight, getting the suspender to do exactly what it did, and within a handful of casts, obviously on the slack, the fish just belted the lure. And honestly, as the footage shows, it nearly pulled him out of the boat. And it was hilarious, but it was exciting and I guess profoundly rewarding because, you know, his eyes were like saucers and, you know, he hadn't witnessed a bite like that. And to get it on camera was fantastic. So definitely a memorable moment in AFC.
Now you're, I think on your AFC scorecard, you did have one win up at Toowoomba. And if there's anything better than winning an AFC, it's winning an AFC on top water. Take us through that bite.
Yeah, look, that you're right, and I think probably my fondest memory would definitely be that win at Toowoomba. We were never in a position in the 2 years I was on AFC. By the time we got to Barra, we were never in a position to be able to challenge for the championship, and that's just how it rolls. So we just tried to focus on doing what we done best, and I got my butt kicked by the Taylor boys down at Awonga. So obviously moving up to their home dam, I had plenty of motivation, but there was also motivation to beat those boys on their home water. So a tough dam, you know well, and a dam that can produce amazingly one day and hardly a bite the next. Pre-fish went okay, nothing like Awonga. Awonga was just off the charts. But getting back to that bite was, I was throwing slick rigs and, you know, we'd done it tough all day. We had a few bites, a lot of soft takes, a lot of just, you know, short striking barra, chin strikes and the like. We went to that point and essentially I got a fish on a cast and it was like in the last 2 minutes of the day. And at the time, Jocko had a dog turd, what I call a dog turd on, which was just it was a tango dancer. And if you look at them in the water, that's what they look like.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's Jocko, and he actually says in that show, like probably only got like less than a minute to go. So we're going, yeah, lobs the cast out, twitch, and then next minute, boom, when he's got this, you know, 70-odd centimetre barra on the board and he got it in the boat with less than 10 seconds to go. So it actually came, that last minute saved our AFC, you know, I guess, opportunity in that event, because prior to that, there was not a single fish boated. We had bumps and bites and just done it tough, but we just grinded it. And funnily enough, 2 fish and 2 casts in the final minute and a half of the day. Yeah, it's stuff like that.
And you know what? He's pretty good at catching the fish that matter now. You would have been like the rest of us, like watching him at 10 kilo last year and just waiting for him to catch that last fish. He does it well when it's all going his way.
Absolutely. He certainly does. And, you know, Carl's got traits that I haven't seen in other individuals. And he brings brings a lot of his own success upon the fact that he's so open to listening to others, you know, and to learning from others. And you don't see that a lot in a lot of our top shelf, any athletes really, but you'd know this as well as I do, that Jocko will always have his ears open.
Yep.
And he'll always be, you know, taking on board and also putting his own spin on things. And with Barra, it's why he's gelled so well. He always was able to take in important components. And, you know, I don't know if there was anyone else that would have been game enough to tie on, you know, a tango dancer for the last cast of the day and pull a fish off like that. So, yeah, Jocko's got a lot of good traits, but, you know, what you just said is exactly right. He's one of a kind.
Mate, tell us about your after your AFC, you became a barra guide, or it might even been during AFC you became a barra guide.
Yeah, it was during AFC.
A lot of time at Mondrian and Awonga, and you got to know those two lakes pretty well. It must feel good for you now to have, you know, you've seen the lakes at their peak. They had their struggles when they ran over during the floods, but it seems like both of those lakes are coming back really strong now. It must give you pleasure to see from afar those fisheries returning to their former glory.
Oh, look, absolutely, Steve. And, you know, I guess this is something I've been saying since the floods of 2010 that obviously wiped out my business and, you know, effectively I started again, which that happens in life. But, you know, probably the most pleasing aspect for me and the key element was that these dam levels dropped. And we just simply didn't see that for that first 6, 7, 8 years. Every, you know, towards the end of every year, there'd be a spike in fishing activity. And all of a sudden there'd be words out, you know, the Barra are back on, it's awesome. We'd get one small weather event and they'd be over the dam wall again and we would be status quo. So I always maintained, and I got asked this so many times on social media, when are they going to go back? What's it going to take? And I've always been, you know, really clear on the fact that the moment these dams can sustain more than 1 or 2 weather events per season without going over, that enables the fishery to recover. And we've seen that. And now that these dams are at a sustainable level, we're starting to see that recruitment and we're starting to see those year classes develop. And of course, that's, you know, that will return the fishery to some kind of, you know, part of how those fisheries used to be, which were just, we never knew what we had, to be honest. Gosh, seeing those numbers of fish go over the dam walls and being part of some of those studies afterwards, and that was, we just did not have a clue that the numbers of untouched fish in those impoundments was just absolutely phenomenal, especially Awonga.
Yeah, and nowadays, of course, with all of the sounder technology, we can see all those fish on the sounders now. So I don't know if that's good for your mental point or not, whether, you know, you're not catching those barras coming underneath you. But both of those lakes have had some serious stocking in them in recent years, haven't they?
Yeah, that's right, Steve. And look, sounder technology is phenomenal today, you know, with side imaging. And I think for me personally, if you're able to see fish and you're not catching them, what it means is you're doing something wrong. So you essentially need to change it up. In regards to the numbers of fish, yeah, absolutely. As we've touched on, you know, the numbers of fish that are acquiring in those dams now that we've got a sustainable level and we're not seeing overflows each year, those year classes are just, you know, basically, you know, going from strength to strength. And that's how we saw the numbers in those 2 dams to start with. So, yeah, it's a big step.
Mate, and I've got one more question for you. You've spent a lot of time being a barra guide through the peak, I suppose, of these lakes, and you've seen them at the peak. If you were just to pick out one lure for each of those lakes, what would you be using?
You're going to hate me because you know exactly what I'm going to say.
Can't be the same one for both.
It can't be the same for both. Rightio. Well, based on the fact that Awonga has settled and points and weed edges are certainly back to, you know, some kind of typical nature of a littoral zone of a dam, a jerkbait is always going to be, you know, a number up there with a number 1, you know, and it can be any type. It could be, you know, a simple bomber. It can be one of the latest versions of, you know, any of the extensions of, you know, the gold bomber or a B-52, any shallow runner, you know, through that part of the period of day, and obviously a deeper jerkbait if you're fishing in the middle of the day. If you're talking about one lure to do everything, I mean, I can't go past the slick rig just simply because of its versatility. You know, it's just something that I know can be boring for some, but there is so many methods and different types of ways you can fish a slick rig. And for me, I think my biggest learnings came from using slick rigs. And I figured out back in early 2005 that there was a retrieve that no one was using, and it was just dynamite. And on days when you simply couldn't raise a scale, and that was just an absolutely flat out burn. You know, my clients ended up naming it the Bonnie spin, because essentially you'd wind that thing as physically fast as your ratios would allow. And that was something that triggered, one, the fish, but two, triggered so many different thought processes for me in regards to catching the old lazy and tired, sleepy, fat, backsided barra.
Yep.
So that's the reasoning behind the profile of the slick rig enables you to do that. And that's a full weight, not the half weight. The full weight enables you to burn it as fast as you can. You can sink it down into 40 feet. You can catch, you know, fish that are on the edges in 40 feet. You can rip it through weed beds. You can put stingers on it. You can make it, you know, like the porcupine rig that the Taylor brothers come up with back in those days was, again, ahead of its time. And I wasn't even at that stage. I was adding hooks, but I was doing it in different ways. And then I saw what they were producing and went, I've got to come up with something like this myself, and made, you know, put my own spin on it like everyone's done. So it's just such an effective fish catching tool. But that said, I love catching barra on blades, transams. You know, there's so many jigging techniques, deep water fishing at Faust, you know, in 100 feet of water. There's just so many different great ways to catch barra. And I think that's what keeps people going back. You know, you can do what you like, utilize what you want to, but, you know, don't fall into the trap of making a decision you want to catch a fish on a top water lure without even being on the water, because you can throw top waters all day long. And if they're not feeding on top, it doesn't matter what you do. Unless you change, nothing's going to change.
Well, that's awesome, mate.
Pretty straightforward.
Great advice from a guy that's spent a lot of his life catching barra, mate. Thank you very much for joining us on ABT Lockdown Live, and hope it all goes well for you down in Tweed Heads there, mate. Thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Been a pleasure.